Hello everyone, and welcome to another series called Bedrock Basics. This is the first video in the series, so it will start with something simple, and by that I mean ticks. And if you're wondering what this series is, it will be a series that teaches the basics of Technical Bedrock Edition and try to cover all aspects of it from very simple beginner things for new Redstoners and technical players that don't understand much about Bedrock and are a bit scared, to some more expert techniques and contraptions and mechanics that people that are familiar with some Redstone or other things but want to learn more. And that's basically what this series will be about. And I'll be adding continuous um, videos to this series, and they won't be really tutorials, they'll be more of explanation videos. So there'll be a different style video. And also, if you're wondering, this skin is by Taco, so thanks for him for sending this to me on Discord. Anyways, so if we get to here, this video is about ticks. And by ticks, I'll explain later what a tick means, but there are multiple different types, and I have them all listed here that are in Bedrock Edition. So we have game ticks, which are very simple, redstone ticks, which are also pretty simple, and random ticks, which are not really that important, but I'll explain it anyways, and they're also simple. Then we have petty ticks, which is about medium difficulty, but once you learn this, it's actually pretty simple. Then we have C ticks, and oops, I accidentally mistyped, but it is actually P ticks. And Pticks and Cticks go hand in hand, and I'll explain what these are later. So if you don't feel confident enough with Redstone to learn these two, you can just stop the video because I'll be starting with the simplest to the most advanced in this video. So the first thing I'll do is explain game ticks and redstone ticks. So these function pretty much the exact same way as in Java, and the easiest way to explain this is one game tick. Imagine if you had a bunch of code that goes down, and this is the entire code of Minecraft. And you start from here, and you go all the way down, and once it gets to here, it does whatever the code says to do, and it shows it to the user, which is the person playing the game. And from the top to the bottom is one tick. And now that's not the best way to explain it, but that's the simplest way. And then once you get to the bottom, you go back up, so it's like a cycle. And the game goes from top to bottom and cycles through the code 20 times in 1 second. So here I have 20 blocks, and these emerald blocks represent one game tick. So 20 times the game code is run from beginning to end, and this is where everything changes. And this actually relates to zero tick. So what happens in zero tick is, imagine if we get a slab, and one way that you may be familiar with zero tick is zero tick pistons. So if we have a piston that gets unpowered, powered in the first half of a game tick, but gets unpowered quickly, the user only sees the very end, and the game only calculates that. So it never thinks that the piston got fully extended, but it did for a teeny bit in the code. And that's why it causes weird updates in the game when you zero tick things, because it's faster, because two things happen in the game before the final output is done. And that's basically the very basic way to explain zero tick. So it's basically faster than the game actually finishes its calculations. And that's why many things can be zero tick, not just zero tick pistons. So for example, Navy Nexus's sand farm, sand-based zero tick crop farms function by converting sand into a falling sand block, but putting it back into a normal block again before the the plant checks to see if there's a block underneath. But somewhere up here, the plant also checks to see if it receives an update, and that's what makes it grow. And then, as I said, next we have redstone ticks, and these are half the speed of game ticks, so they happen 10 times per second. So every 2 game ticks, there is 1 redstone tick. And redstone ticks are basically how redstone functions. So here we have a 1 tick repeater. So if we grab signal here and unpower and power, this will power 1 tick after this one because it adds 1 tick of delay. Now we can also do 2 ticks like this, or we can even do it like this by adding 2. If you notice, those 2 dusts activate at the same time. So it's pretty simple addition. Now, as we said here, 10 redstone ticks is 1 second. So if we go 4 plus 4 plus 2, in 1 second after I flick this lever, that will turn on. 1, boom. And you can time it if you want, but it'll always be 1 second unless there's one exception. The world is lagging. If the world is lagging, it cannot finish the code in the desired amount of time, and that's when your world lags. So you may experience this on Realms. Your frames are fine, but things like this will take forever and pistons are slow. The reason is because the game can't calculate everything fast enough. And that's why there is lag without any frame drops. And if you want to see how fast a redstone tick is, this creates a 4 game tick clock or a 2 redstone tick clock. And basically, this means that it powers any blocks every 2 redstone ticks. So it's on for 1 redstone tick, and then it's off for another. So if you flick this lever, this is the speed of it. So it is pretty fast. And this is, purely speaking, the fastest possible way to power something in Minecraft. Now, I will explain later in the video, once I get to these, that it is possible to create faster clocks, but these are a bit controversial as some people do not count these as clocks, but that is for later on in the video. So now that you know how redstone ticks and game ticks work, and also game ticks apply to everything. So for example, the difference between sand falling or scaffolding updating, pretty much anything is functioned in game ticks. So even mobs moving and stuff like that. Next is random tick. So random ticks are a thing that happen randomly. So imagine instead of being every 20 times, it just happens maybe here and maybe a couple seconds later another time, or maybe even 2 times very quickly. And this is what adds randomness to the game. And by that, there are a lot of things that utilize this. So, for example, plants is the most common. So if you grab something like bamboo, a random number of in random intervals, this plant will get an update by random ticks, and then it has a chance to grow. And currently, if we do game rule random tick speed, it'll give us a random tick speed. So 1 is the default on Bedrock Edition, but we can speed this up. So if we do random tick speed to 10, that means it's sending an update to these plants 10 times faster. We can go a lot higher, to like 1000. As you can see, now the plant is growing like crazy. And this applies to a lot of things. So all these plants, we can do vines, trees even, are also affected by this. So we'll leave that later. We do vines here. And also things like these grass blocks with plants when there's a block above it. As you can see, these are turning back into dirt a lot faster than usual. And all kinds of things like this are affected by random tick speed. This is what adds randomness to the game. And there's also another layer of randomness. As you can see, even if it does receive an update, it does not mean it will grow. And that's why they'll grow at different speeds. And there goes the oak tree. It's a pretty big one. That's why these can have different heights or grow at different speeds, even though they're receiving the updates at the same time. Now let's set this back down to 1, as it is a bit laggy because more calculations are happening per second. So next, I'll be talking about pending ticks. So these are a bit more difficult, and you may have heard pending ticks from certain people as something that is very, very bad and you do not want in your world. However, that is not entirely true, and I'll be explaining why. But first, I'll explain what pending ticks are. So the easiest analogy for pending ticks is, imagine a store that can sell their customers products every hour. They could do a total of 100 people. So that's their maximum speed. They can do less, and there is a line of people that are getting ready to buy their stuff. However, it is fine as long as less than 100 people are going into the line per hour. If more than 100 people are going into the line every hour, that means people start building up, and the line will start getting longer and longer and bigger. And if you can imagine, that will cause lots and lots of problems. And that's basically the same concept with pending ticks. So pending ticks are a way for Minecraft Bedrock Edition to schedule updates or things that change in later, and it's kind of like a list, and it can do each one of these every game tick, and it can do 100 to 200 of these every game tick within one chunk. Now I'll explain why it's 100 to 200 later, but first, one chunk is a 16 by 16 area. So if we do, let's go down a block, slash fill, and do something like this. Let's see, do something like acacia logs, just a very beautiful block. This is the size of one chunk. However, these aren't placed randomly in the world. They are in a neat grid starting from 0, 0 of the world. And you may notice when your render distance is lower, chunks are done the way that your render distance is measured, as well as your simulation distance. And basically this is how the game stops from being laggy, as it can load these as groups. However, certain things happen only within these chunks, and pending ticks is one of them. So each one of these chunks can handle 100 to 200 of these updates every game tick. And the reason why that it is 100 to 200 is there are two groups of pending ticks, and each one can do 100. So now the list is unknown, and this was provided by a code digger by the name of Rufus Atticus. So I will be putting his channel in the description, as a lot of info from this YouTube video and other ones in this series will be coming from him, as he finds the secrets and mechanics of the game by looking into the code. And for example, a block that uses pending ticks is an observer. So for example, to power this next block, it requires a pending tick. And if we have more than 100 of these observers, it will overflow. And the reason why people say pending ticks can cause corruption is if you start building these up by creating too many of them, the chunk file size will become so big that the game will either not load these chunks because it just can't handle it, or even worse, if you log out near these, you may not even be able to log into your world. Now you can remove these by going into the file, so it's not really a permanent corruption, but it's definitely not something that you should mess with. So if this is group 1, and these can be done by every game tick for 100 of these. Let's say something else like water flowing also uses pending ticks. That means that we can have 100 of these updates too, because now we're just pretending that these are in separate groups. They may not be, or they may, but so each of these can do 100. But what if we had something like a nether portal lighting? Nether portal lighting also creates pending ticks, and that is why certain farms, such as Navy Nexus's portal tick gold farm, has to be spaced out. And that is because if you have too many nether portals in one chunk, it can create so many pending ticks that it will corrupt your world. And let's say that these are in the same category as the observers. That means even if we don't have any water flowing, we can only have a shared amount of 100 between these two. And portals do create a lot of pending ticks very easily. So this is why it could be either 100, because we can only have 100 of these two, or it could be 200, or something in between, depending on how much of each you have and how much you're creating. That is basically why that number is not exact. But if you're creating something that does create pending ticks, you should always go by 100, because 200 may not always be the case. But it does not seem like pending ticks are a very good thing so far. However, we can abuse them. So, as they send updates to particular things, for example, if we have something like this, and we put some, say, wheat, pending ticks are used. Oops, let me set the random tick speed back to 1. Actually, I'm going to set it to 0 to show that this crop will never grow because it will never get updated. And removing this is what causes pending ticks. So if you notice, it will not break off instantly. It's actually there for a very short amount of time. However, if we create a lot of pending ticks, we can delay the update and remove the dirt block and put it back without the seeds ever realizing that the block below them is gone. So there are a couple easy ways to do this. The first method is a bit more dangerous, but it is to use water and soul sand and magma blocks. So if we grab some of those, and we grab some pistons, and this is pretty easy to make in your world. Let's see, what else do we need? Water. Let me just grab some glass so that you can see. And this is probably not lined up perfectly with a chunk, so I'm going to teleport myself to 0, 0. So here's the center of the world. And if we then fill here, this should be a chunk, and there should be another chunk here, here, and here, as this is 0, 0, the center of the world. Now, we can suppress or delay the pending ticks in just this chunk. So if we create something like this, there's soul sand, some magma blocks, like this, and we move these back and forth above water, you can create a lot of pending ticks very quickly, and this is why this is a very effective method, yet dangerous, because if you leave this running, it will corrupt your world very, very easily. So this is a warning, and so you do not want to mess with this if you do not know what you're doing, so be very, very careful with this. Actually, we can put glass here. Put this in. There we go. So we should get the bubbles. That's weird. It seems to not be updating. So looks like we have to replace these like this. Actually, just moving these should just be fine. So then we're going to put a torch here and grab some blocks and wrap them around over here. Then this will get pushed over. Actually, we need glass here too. And replace our torch again. Then we could do the same thing on this side. But before we put the torch here and complete the circuits, we want to add a lever because we need to be able to turn this off. So this will constantly create and remove bubble columns. And another thing that uses pending ticks is sand. So if we do something simple like this, and put sand here, the sand will power this dust here and push it up. So this will create a nice little clock, and the sand falling is what uses pending ticks. So if we start running this, as you can see, the sand will start to float, and that is because it's taking more and more time for the sand to receive its update to fall down. As you can see, it's slowly taking longer and longer, and it will grow exponentially, and this is pretty dangerous. And you can suppress all kinds of things with this. So if we bring back our dirt, and as you can see, it's built up a pretty big amount now. So you want to leave like this until it starts going back to normal, or else you can risk corrupting your world. And we grab our seeds again. Let's see. So you can hear that the sand has gone back to normal, and that means that the pending ticks have all been cleared from this chunk. We can run this machine again. And let's grow this here. Remember, this plant will never grow on its own normally, because we have the random tick speed set to 0. However, we can move this back and forth, and you can see it will not break. And if we turn this off and wait, the crop will start growing every time its pending tick is scheduled. And this is how we can grow certain crops that cannot be 0 ticked. So that is a very good advantage. And for example, one thing that you can do is grow trees with this without any bone meal. And Poison Rain has been working on a farm that uses this mechanic and is very, very cool. But the problem with designing stuff like this is certain things use pending ticks. So as I said, observers use pending ticks, even things like buttons use it. So go here, see how the button does not get unpressed. If we put something like this here, the observer will take a lot longer to update. And that's why making contraptions of this can be hard. Now, the other way to make something like that abuses pending ticks, but you want it to be AFKable, is to use observers. So I'll set up the contraption in a moment. I'll be right back. So now I have created a simple observer clock. So this is probably one of the simplest clocks in Minecraft. And if you do not know, what an observer does is, of course, detect changes in front of it. And every time that happens, it pulses. But if we put two of these facing each other, they create a back and forth clock, because this one detects this one being changed and turns on. But then this one detects that being changed and turns on, and back and forth. And it's a very simple clock, and we can just simply see that working by doing this. Now if we look up, you will see a lot of observers. So here we have an observer clock here that we can move in and out with pistons. And then a line of observers that all detect in a long chain. Then this all goes out. Then these all come up. And this is just a block of observers. Now, if you remember, these create pending ticks. So if we turn this on, the observers will send signals to each other. And as you can see, the signal should reach here already, but it hasn't. And if you notice, they're all in random order and are not really synchronized at all. And the reason is because so many observers are being activated at once that the game cannot calculate them all at once, because it can only do 100 per game tick. And if we come down here, notice our observer clock has slowed down a lot. And the reason why this is safe is because if you notice, to activate all these observers, we're using an observer clock. And the more observers we add and the more pending ticks we build up, the slower this clock is, which means the less observers that are updated. So this will find a perfect balance between creating enough pending ticks to do some cool farms, but not corrupt your world at the same time. So as you can see, the same clock happens here. As you can see, it's not as extreme of a pending tick buildup, but we can still trick our crops into growing. But as you can see, if we're unlucky, the crop can be updated while it's still growing. And if we're lucky, as you can see, we can create tree farms or all kinds of things that do not use bone meal. And there we go. We have a fully grown crop. And this is basically the basis of pending ticks, and also why they can be dangerous. And once they build up, it can take a bit. So these observers will still be activating for a pretty long time because they are going very, very slowly. And that's pretty much it for pending ticks. So they're pretty straightforward. And once you learn them, they actually are not that bad at all. And they can break a lot of things because they affect observers. So for example, world eaters, which are contraptions that go back and forth in the world and drop TNT, if you have things like sand and water falling down everywhere, it can create so many pending ticks that these observers never activate and don't make the contraptions work the way they're intended. So it's something that you should really know for things such as corruption, but also can break contraptions in ways that you may not think as possible, and you may be really confused, like, why is this happening? And that could be possibly because of pending ticks. And if your world does get corrupted for unknown reasons, you could ask some people on Discord, for example, the TechRock Discord or Advanced Automation. I'll be putting their links in the description to see if there's any pending tick buildups in your world, and they may be able to remove them. Now, something that has been coming for a while, Cticks and Pticks. So if you come back to our original chart, you may notice that every redstone tick, there are 2 game ticks. The question is there anything different? And there actually is, and that is basically the idea of Cticks and Pticks. And Cticks and Pticks stand for producer and consumer ticks. And basically, the first one that happens are consumer ticks. And the second one are producer ticks. And basically, what the difference is certain redstone contraptions are either a producer or a consumer. And there is a very easy way to find out, and a very easy way to explain them. And we can create only one of these by splitting these redstone ticks in half. So if you look here, these look pretty normal. Nothing happens to this line. And this one pulses a little bit at the very end. However, if we put a piston here, as you can see, there actually is a signal being sent here. But if we put a repeater, it doesn't activate. If you go over here, we put a piston, we put a repeater, the piston does not activate, but the repeater does. And essentially, these two things can split the redstone input into half a redstone tick. So this one creates consumer ticks, which happen in the beginning of a redstone tick. And that is why you don't see an update, because it is already off by the time this redstone dust shows you if it's on or off. But there actually is data being sent. And this happens in the second half. And basically, certain things are consumer blocks, and others are producer blocks. And the easiest way to explain this is producers produce redstone. So if we come here, we have repeaters, comparators, observers, and one last thing is a new addition, target blocks. And if you notice, this is a bit related to the topic, but these are all transparent blocks. So even if we power this, the dust does not go through. And that is why target blocks are transparent, because these are producers, because when you hit them with entities or projectiles, they create redstone power. And same with observers, they can create redstone power, comparators, and also repeaters. And these all receive updates in the very end or second half of a redstone tick. So if we come here and we connect these two dust lines, we can see that our set of consumers here, we have these that can be updated by this dust, and there's no really way to activate a target block doing this method. These are all fine, they'll update. And just to show that the observer is updating, I'll put a piston there. There we go. And then consumers consume redstone. So basically, they use the redstone power to change it into things that are not other redstone things. So pistons push blocks, they don't create any signals. If we come here, we also have dispensers, droppers, and this is hard to tell, but hoppers getting powered is also a thing. We also have rails, any of these, note blocks, and lamps, bells. Actually, bells, I think, are a weird one because, as you can see, they do create signals when hit by projectiles, if I recall correctly. Oh, actually, they do not. Sorry about that. So actually, that is why they are consumers, because they just consume the redstone signal and do not create new ones. We also have our note blocks. Oops. Droppers, dispensers, and rails. So if we do this here, see these all get updated. And the dust does not even look like it's being powered. And you might be wondering, why is this useful? Well, say that you have something like this, and you only wanted to power these top pistons once, but then you later want to power just these. Using these mechanics, as you can see, this only pulses the top ones, and this will only pulse the bottom pistons. So it can be useful in all kinds of situations. Now, I will admit I do not use this too much, but in compact redstone, it can be very useful. And it's something that people a lot of times are really scared of, but it is pretty straightforward once you realize why these are named in this way. And a lot of other complicated things, like for example, trees growing happen in certain game ticks. But you may notice that we can only do one tick pulses using this method. However, if we do something like this, I think this will power all of them. But we grab a piston here. And let's cut that signal off. Shit, I think I did the timings a bit wrong. As you can see, these two pistons activate at the exact same time, even though this one should happen a little bit later because there is a repeater. And that is because the piston does not get activated by the dust, because the first thing that happens is a P-tick or a producer tick, and then it powers both. So that's why there's a bit of delay even though there's only dust. And this can be used for tree farming and other things where you want two things to activate at the same time, but you need to extend the signal for one of them. For example, like if the signal strength was too far to reach this piston, you can add a repeater and power it using something like this, and that will activate them both at the same time. And this is a pretty small mechanic that is often overlooked. But if you remember, early in the video, I was talking about clocks, and I will explain about clocks a bit more. And I did say that the fastest clock was something like this, where we have a lever going into a subtraction mode comparator. If you power that, how do we do something faster than this? If you come back to our chart, if we either turn on power for this half of the tick, and then turn it off here, and turn it back here, that is technically a clock. However, some people do not think that these are not clocks, because I'll show you in a second. So first I will do, and these are called 2 game tick clocks. So if I show right here, and we grab, so another way to create these p-tick pulses is a observer being 1 tick pulse by a piston, so like this, and observers actually do send a signal. And as you can see, the piston will not actually turn off and on, because what it sees is there is a constant pulse, because every time it checks during a P-tick, it's on. It never checks during C-ticks. That's why it'll never turn on or off, and that is why some people do not think this is a clock. Now, I personally think these are clocks, but I also think that these not being clocks is a very valid argument. As you can see, this is just being powered, and repeaters are not affected at all. Technically, this is turning off and on, but the contraptions, like certain blocks like pistons, it's just on or just off. And that is why some people consider these clocks and others don't. It is a very cloudy area of Minecraft. But that is pretty much all you really need to know about Pticks and Cticks. If you run into like some very crazy thing that you have no idea what it means, you can always ask in the TechRock, Exploit, AA, and many other servers that will be glad to help you in Discord. And I will be putting, of course, their links to join them in the description, as they're a pretty welcoming community that likes to help. Anyways, for this video about ticks, that is it for this video. This is a new style of video that I'm doing, and if there's any feedback, I will be glad to take it in. And thank you for watching, See you in the next Redstone video.